Private First Class Rebecca Davis, lined up behind her assigned firing position at Fort Benning's Range, Charlie, her M4 carbine feeling foreign and unwieldy in her trembling hands as she prepared for another humiliating display of marksmanship incompetence at 8 a.m. The Georgia morning sun cast long shadows across the qualification range, and around her 37 other basic combat training recruits prepared for their final shooting test with the confident movements of soldiers who had gradually mastered their weapons over 9 weeks of intensive training. Which city are you watching from? Share it in the comments. Maybe someone else from your city is here too. And if you believe heroes can appear in the most unexpected ways, hit subscribe and give this video a like. Drill Sergeant First Class Michael Patterson watched Rebecca's preparation with the weary expression of someone who had exhausted every teaching technique in his arsenal over the past 2 months. In his 19 years of training Army recruits, he had never encountered a soldier who struggled as consistently and dramatically with basic marksmanship skills as Rebecca Davis. Her performance wasn't just below average, it was so spectacularly poor that it had become legendary throughout the training battalion. Davis, Drill Sergeant Patterson called out, his voice carrying the frustrated tone of someone who had repeated the same instructions hundreds of times. Remember what we've practiced. Sight alignment, breathing control, and smooth trigger squeeze. This is your final qualification attempt, and your entire company's graduation depends on everyone passing. Rebecca nodded nervously, trying to control the anxiety that made her hands shake whenever she attempted to engage targets during training. She knew exactly what her fellow recruits thought of her: hopeless, probably unsuitable for military service, and definitely the weak link that might prevent their entire company from graduating on schedule. Private Williams, shooting in the position next to Rebecca, whispered loud enough for others to hear. She couldn't hit water if she fell out of a boat. How is she going to pass qualification when she's never hit a target during training? Private Martinez, positioned on Rebecca's other side, nodded in agreement. 9 weeks of training and she hasn't qualified once. The drill sergeants should have recycled her weeks ago. But what none of them knew was that Rebecca Davis had once been Staff Sergeant Rebecca Mitchell, U.S. Army Sniper School graduate, with classified precision shooting records that would make her current struggles seem like an elaborate psychological experiment. The truth was buried in medical files and identity protection protocols that required security clearances exceeding those of most colonels, involving treatment for combat-related trauma that had shattered her ability to shoot in peaceful training environments. The qualification course began with targets at 50 meters, distances that competent soldiers could engage with reasonable accuracy using basic marksmanship fundamentals. Rebecca settled into the prone position and attempted to acquire her first target through the rifle's iron sights, but something catastrophic happened the moment she tried to align her sight picture. Instead of the steady control that should have characterized basic shooting, Rebecca's hands began trembling uncontrollably, and her breathing became rapid and shallow in ways that suggested panic rather than nervousness. Her first shot missed the target by nearly 10 feet, impacting the dirt berm far to the left of her intended point of aim. Davis, what the hell was that? Demanded Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, the assistant instructor who was monitoring her lane. That shot wasn't even close to the target area. Rebecca worked the bolt on her rifle with movements that appeared clumsy despite weeks of practice, her confidence already shattered by another public demonstration of apparent incompetence. Sorry, Drill Sergeant, I'll do better with the next shot. But the next shot was equally disastrous, flying high and wide of the target in ways that suggested fundamental problems with her shooting technique. By the end of the 50-meter engagement, Rebecca had failed to hit the target with any of her 10 allocated rounds. The qualification continued with targets at 100 meters, 200 meters, and finally 300 meters, each distance presenting new challenges that Rebecca seemed unable to overcome. Her shot pattern was so scattered that it appeared random, as if she were firing with her eyes closed rather than using proper marksmanship techniques. Drill Sergeant Patterson approached Rebecca's position during the ceasefire between 2,000-meter and 300-meter engagements, his expression showing the kind of professional concern that preceded difficult conversations about a soldier's suitability for continued military service. Davis, this is your final chance to qualify, Patterson said quietly, trying to maintain some privacy despite the obvious attention her failures were attracting from other recruits. You need to hit 14 out of 20 targets at 300 meters to achieve the minimum passing score. Rebecca looked up at Patterson with obvious desperation in her eyes. She knew that failing this final qualification attempt would result in recycling to another company, additional weeks of training, and the possibility of being discharged from the Army entirely if her marksmanship didn't improve. "I understand, Drill Sergeant. I'll do my best." Patterson studied Rebecca's face, looking for some sign of the determination and fighting spirit that had allowed other struggling recruits to overcome their challenges and successfully complete training. "Davis, I've seen your written test scores and your performance in other areas of training. You understand the theory of marksmanship better than most recruits, but you can't seem to apply that knowledge when you're actually shooting." The truth was that Rebecca's apparent incompetence with marksmanship training was actually a complex post-traumatic stress response that made shooting exercises psychologically triggering in ways that operational precision shooting had never been. Every time she looked through rifle sights in training environments, her mind transported her back to rooftops in Iraq, where single shots had meant the difference between mission success and American casualties. But she couldn't explain this to Patterson or anyone else at Fort Benning without revealing classified information about her background and compromising the identity protection protocols that were part of her psychological recovery and rehabilitation program. The 300-meter targets appeared, and Rebecca settled into her final shooting position, knowing that her military career hung in the balance. Around her, other recruits were achieving the hits they needed to pass qualification, their confidence building with each successful engagement. Rebecca's first shot at 300 meters missed by an even wider margin than her previous attempts, suggesting that the increased distance was overwhelming her already fragile shooting capabilities. Her second and third shots were equally scattered, and by her fifth shot it was clear that she was not going to achieve the minimum score required for graduation. "Davis, cease fire," Drill Sergeant Patterson called out after her 10th consecutive miss. "Step back from the firing line." Rebecca saved her weapon and stood up, knowing that her failure was now complete and public. Every recruit in her company had witnessed her inability to hit targets that they were managing to engage successfully, and her status as the soldier who couldn't qualify with basic weapons would follow her through any subsequent training attempts. But as Rebecca was collecting her equipment and preparing for the inevitable conversation about remedial training or possible discharge, an emergency alarm began sounding throughout Fort Benning, followed by radio traffic that would transform her situation in ways nobody could anticipate. "All stations, this is base security," came the urgent announcement over the emergency communication system. "We have an active shooter situation at the visitor center, with multiple hostages. All available personnel implement lockdown procedures immediately." Within minutes, the qualification range was swarming with emergency responders, military police, and tactical teams preparing to address what appeared to be a complex hostage situation involving armed individuals who had taken control of the base visitor center during peak visiting hours. Drill Sergeant Patterson was coordinating with base security when additional information began coming over the radio that escalated the situation beyond what conventional tactical teams were prepared to handle. "Security, be advised that we have confirmed multiple subjects with advanced tactical knowledge who have barricaded themselves in the visitor center with approximately 35 hostages," reported the incident commander. "They appear to have military training and are positioned in ways that make conventional assault extremely dangerous." Patterson reviewed the tactical situation with growing concern. The visitor center's design included large windows and elevated positions that would require precision shooting capabilities to resolve safely. But the available SWAT teams were equipped for close-quarters tactical operations rather than long-range precision engagements. "We need someone with advanced marksmanship skills for possible precision shots from extended range," the tactical commander requested over the radio. "The subjects are positioned in ways that require expert-level shooting to neutralize without endangering hostages." Patterson looked around at his available personnel, most of whom were basic training recruits with minimal shooting experience and drill sergeants whose tactical training focused on instruction rather than operational employment. The situation required someone with capabilities that exceeded anything available among the immediate response personnel. That's when Rebecca stepped forward, her decision made despite knowing it would expose everything she had been concealing for months. "Drill Sergeant Patterson," Rebecca said quietly, her voice steady in a way that nobody at Fort Benning had heard before. "I volunteer for precision shooting assignment." Patterson stared at Rebecca with complete disbelief. "Davis, you just failed basic qualification. This situation requires someone with expert-level marksmanship skills." Rebecca met his gaze with confidence that nobody had seen during 9 weeks of training. "Drill sergeant, I have precision shooting experience that's not reflected in my training performance." The implication was staggering. But before Patterson could question Rebecca further, the tactical situation deteriorated in ways that required immediate action regardless of conventional protocols. "All stations. Hostage situation is escalating," came the urgent radio update. "Subjects are threatening to begin executing hostages if tactical teams attempt entry. We need precision shooting capability immediately." Patterson made a command decision based more on desperation than confidence. "Davis, if you have any shooting experience that might help this situation, now is the time to prove it." Rebecca was already moving toward the equipment storage area, where precision rifles were maintained for advanced marksmanship training. Her movements were suddenly fluid and professional, demonstrating familiarity with sniper equipment that contradicted everything Patterson had observed during her training. "Drill sergeant, I'll need access to the M24 sniper weapon system and match-grade ammunition," Rebecca said with technical knowledge that exceeded anything taught in basic training. Patterson watched in amazement as Rebecca handled the precision rifle with the professional competence of someone completely familiar with advanced sniper equipment. Her weapon checks were thorough and efficient, demonstrating capabilities that transformed his understanding of her actual background and training. "Davis, where did you learn to handle sniper equipment?" Rebecca was conducting final preparations for what would be one of the most challenging shots of her career. "Drill sergeant, I have operational experience with precision shooting that I haven't discussed previously." 20 minutes later, Rebecca was positioned on the roof of a building 850 meters from the visitor center, equipped with the M24 sniper rifle and high-power optics that would allow her to engage targets that were barely visible to conventional tactical teams. Drill Sergeant Patterson was spotting for her, watching through binoculars as Rebecca prepared for shots that would require extraordinary precision under conditions that would challenge the most experienced military snipers. "Davis, I count 3 subjects visible through the visitor center windows," Patterson reported quietly. "They're positioned behind hostages with minimal target areas exposed. Wind is variable at 8 to 12 miles per hour, and you'll have single opportunities before they react to gunfire." Rebecca studied the tactical situation through her rifle scope, with analytical skills that demonstrated extensive training in precision shooting under combat conditions. Her breathing was controlled, her movements were deliberate, and her entire demeanor reflected someone operating within their area of expertise. "I have the shots," Rebecca said calmly, her voice displaying none of the uncertainty that had characterized her training performance. "Stand by for engagement." Rebecca controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and began applying pressure to the trigger, with mechanical precision that came from thousands of hours of training that had been suppressed, but never lost. The first shot cracked across the distance, and through his spotting scope, Patterson watched as the primary subject dropped immediately, neutralized by a precision shot that struck exactly where Rebecca had aimed, despite challenging wind conditions and an extremely small target area. "Holy shit!" Patterson whispered, watching Rebecca work the bolts smoothly and acquire her second target. That was an impossible shot. Rebecca's second and third engagements were equally precise, each shot placed with surgical accuracy that eliminated threats while ensuring the safety of hostages who were positioned within inches of her targets. "All targets neutralized," Rebecca reported calmly as she saved her weapon and began collecting her equipment. "Hostages are secure for tactical team entry." Patterson was staring at Rebecca with complete amazement. "Davis, that was some of the most precise shooting I've ever witnessed. You just made 3 shots that would challenge our best snipers." Rebecca looked at Patterson with an expression that was no longer that of a struggling recruit, but of someone who had been concealing extraordinary capabilities for reasons that nobody at Fort Benning understood. "Drill Sergeant, I have experience with precision shooting in operational environments." 3 hours later, Rebecca found herself in the office of Colonel James Harrison, the commanding officer of Fort Benning's training brigade, along with Drill Sergeant Patterson and a woman in civilian clothes who had introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chen from the Department of Defense Psychological Services. Private Davis, Colonel Harrison began, studying a file that had appeared on his desk with obvious classification markings. Your performance during today's hostage situation has raised serious questions about your background and your assignment here at Fort Benning. Rebecca sat at attention, knowing that the conversation was about to reveal aspects of her service that she had been concealing throughout basic training. Yes, sir. Dr. Chen opened a thick file folder containing documents that Rebecca recognized from her previous military service. Rebecca, your shooting today demonstrated capabilities that aren't consistent with your apparent struggles during basic training. Colonel Harrison leaned forward, his expression showing respect mixed with confusion. Davis, how do you reconcile failing basic marksmanship qualification with making precision shots that saved 35 hostages? Rebecca chose her words carefully, knowing that her explanation would need to balance operational security requirements with the need to justify her current situation. Sir, there are aspects of my background that affect how I perform in different shooting environments. Dr. Chen spoke up with the authority of someone familiar with Rebecca's actual history. Colonel, Rebecca is participating in a specialized psychological recovery program designed to help combat veterans with post-traumatic stress transition back to conventional military service following traumatic operational experiences. Colonel Harrison was impressed despite his confusion about the circumstances. Dr. Chen, are you saying that Private Davis has prior military experience that's not reflected in her basic training records? Yes, sir, Dr. Chen replied. Rebecca served as Staff Sergeant Rebecca Mitchell with the U.S. Army Sniper School and multiple classified precision shooting assignments before experiencing combat trauma that required psychological treatment and identity transition. Rebecca finally relaxed slightly, knowing that her cover had been necessarily compromised, but that her actual background was now being revealed to people with appropriate clearances. Yes, sir, that's correct. Dr. Chen continued with obvious respect for Rebecca's service and sacrifice. Rebecca's marksmanship difficulties during training are related to post-traumatic stress disorder that makes peaceful shooting exercises psychologically triggering, while her operational capabilities remain fully intact during actual emergency situations where lives are at stake. Colonel Harrison considered this explanation while reviewing Rebecca's personnel file and the documentation of her struggles during basic training. Davis, why wasn't this information included in your training assignment briefing? Rebecca's voice grew quiet as she explained the complexity of her situation. Sir, the recovery program requires that participants appear to struggle with routine military skills to avoid pressure to return to operational assignments before psychological readiness. Dr. Chen nodded with understanding. Colonel, the program provides a controlled environment for processing combat trauma, while maintaining access to the tactical skills that make special operations personnel valuable during genuine emergencies. Colonel Harrison stood up, clearly impressed by the revelation of Rebecca's true background and the success of her psychological recovery program. Davis, today's successful hostage resolution proved that your tactical skills are not only intact, but exceptional. Rebecca felt relief, mixed with anticipation about the future direction of her military service. Sir, will I continue with basic training, or will my assignment change based on today's events? Dr. Chen smiled with obvious pride in Rebecca's progress and recovery. Rebecca, you'll be assigned to specialized instructor duties that make use of your actual experience while continuing psychological support for complete trauma recovery. Colonel Harrison was clearly impressed by the entire situation. Davis, what kind of instructor duties are we discussing for someone with your unique background and demonstrated capabilities? Sir, Dr. Chen replied, Rebecca will become a senior instructor for advanced marksmanship training, working with experienced soldiers who need precision shooting instruction from someone with actual sniper school credentials and operational experience. 3 months later, Staff Sergeant Rebecca Davis stood before a class of 12 advanced marksmanship students at Fort Benning's sniper training facility, wearing the U.S. Army Sniper School badge and the instructor certification that marked her as qualified for the Army's most demanding precision shooting programs. Drill Sergeant Patterson, who had requested assignment as her assistant instructor, watched as Rebecca demonstrated shooting techniques that incorporated lessons learned from actual sniper operations and the psychological recovery process that had allowed her to return to effective service. Staff Sergeant Davis, your students are achieving precision standards that exceed anything we've seen in conventional marksmanship programs, Patterson observed with obvious admiration. Rebecca smiled, watching her students apply combat-proven techniques that she could finally share without compromising her recovery process or revealing classified information inappropriately. Drill Sergeant, I'm teaching them methods that work when precision matters more than anything else in the world. Patterson nodded approvingly, clearly impressed by the transformation in Rebecca's confidence and effectiveness as both a shooter and an instructor. Davis, you've taught all of us something important about not judging soldiers based on training performance that might not reflect their actual capabilities and experience. As Rebecca watched her students continue their advanced training, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point in her military career. She had spent 9 weeks accepting professional humiliation and enduring doubts about her suitability for military service while processing psychological trauma that made routine training feel overwhelming, when actually she possessed precision shooting capabilities that exceeded those of any instructor at Fort Benning. The recovery process had been more challenging than any sniper mission she had undertaken during her operational assignments. Learning to separate peaceful training environments from combat memories required patience, professional psychological support, and the understanding of medical professionals who specialized in helping combat veterans transition successfully back to conventional military service. Her phone buzzed with an encouraging message from one of her former basic training battle buddies. Rebecca, heard about your new assignment and your sniper background. Thank you for saving those hostages and showing us what real heroes look like. You're an inspiration to all of us. Rebecca touched the U.S. Army Sniper School badge on her uniform, no longer hidden shamefully in her personal effects but displayed proudly as recognition of training, service, and sacrifice that had never been diminished by the challenges of psychological recovery and trauma treatment. The woman who couldn't hit water if she fell out of a boat had revealed herself as one of the most skilled precision marksmen in American military history, proving that healing from combat trauma requires time, understanding, and professional support, and that the greatest warriors sometimes need specialized care and patience to rediscover their strength and return to meaningful service that benefits the entire military community. Her students continued their training with renewed confidence, knowing they were learning from someone who had not only mastered the technical aspects of precision shooting, but had also overcome the psychological challenges that could affect any soldier who had experienced the realities of combat operations where split-second decisions determined life and death outcomes.